Good afternoon, everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the panel on food security. And we are very lucky to have a truly international panel today. I hope you will enjoy an informal discussion. Our plan today is to have a very short introduction by each of the panelists, and then have an open conversation on this very multidimensional and very difficult subject of food security. Before that, I'll say a few words. Yesterday night, I was looking at the recent statistics on food security and stumbled upon a very, I think, striking fact for all of us who grew up at the time thinking about food security as an issue of availability, and then later the issue of distribution. And one fact that we already live in a world where we have more obese people than starving people, I think is staggering. But indeed, in 2006, we bypassed 1 billion people in obesity, where the starvation number is somewhere around 900 million, which only highlights the dimension of this problem that is so multifaceted, that has to do with availability, but also with access, not only economic access, but also the distribution challenges we're beginning to face, and then, of course, the use of food and safety and so on. So it's my honor to have here a wonderful panel. To my right is Ambassador Manuel Domingos Augusto, State Secretary at the Ministry of the External Relations of the Republic of Angola. We have here as well Mrs. Valentine Rugwabiza, who serves as Deputy Director General at the World Trade Organization. We're also happy to have here from Brazil Dr. José Humberto de Brito Cruz, who serves as Senior Advisor at the Policy Planning Unit at the Ministry of External Relations of Federative Republic of Brazil. And we're also happy to have here a futurist and the Executive Director of Millennium Project from the US, Mr. Jerome Glenn. So welcome. I'll ask each of you to start us going with a short remarks. You can keep them in whatever length you think will serve us, as we have really 2 hours and hope for a productive conversation. And I hope it would be fine to start with Mrs. Valentine Rugwabiza. You have enjoyed a career that spans across corporate world, the diplomatic world, and now World Trade Organization. So I hope that as a starting remark will get us on the right place. So the floor is yours, Valentine.
Thank you, and very happy to be with you this afternoon for such a subject that is actually of a vital interest to all of us. Now, as you've said, this is an issue that is multifaceted. Clearly, you mentioned the numbers. People were suffering from hunger, more than 1 billion, more than 2 billion malnutrition. And well, and right now, all of us, we've been watching on our screens very regularly just the headlines. Once again, what I call the dark headlines on the African continent, on my continent, are back. You're all watching what is going on in the Horn of Africa. Now, one needs at the same time, yes, this is an urgent issue, but one needs to start a little bit back and look at both the structural reasons for that and the less structural reasons. And when I, maybe more particularly looking at the African continent, I would like to say that let's us remember that at a certain point, Africa altogether was a net food exporter continent. Not so long ago, actually, in the 70s, and within just 20 years, it became a net food importer country, continent. And this, today, the production the population is growing in a much more important way than we are producing food. So these are some worrying signals. But at the same time, let's keep the other side. Let's continue to look at the other side of the picture. And the other side of the picture being that this same continent is also the continent that is the richest in terms of reserves of arable land. So clearly, there is the potential, there is the capacity to produce more food, to produce it more efficiently on the African continent, and to make it more affordable. Now, what prevents that from happening? Many reasons. Many who are here present on this panel will have the opportunity to develop some reasons. Maybe I will look at the reasons. I would like to just dwell a little bit deeper with you at the reasons that have to do with trade, since this is the perspective I'm coming from. Now, reasons that have to do with trade, let's look first of all at where is staple food for most people, where is it produced? Well, one cause of vulnerability, at least, is that the production of food is highly concentrated. The production of staple food is very highly concentrated. You have 70% of world rice that is produced just in 5 countries. You have 80% of soybeans, that is a staple food for so many people, for millions of people, that is just produced in 3 countries. And the same for corn. You have 70% of corn that is produced just in 5 countries. So that exposes the vulnerability of our food security. That exposes that were anything to happen in one of those countries for whatever reasons, or if any ban was put to any export of food, that just to give you the idea, the magnitude of the impact that will have on millions of people. So food is too much, food is produced in very few countries, the production is too much concentrated, and there are reasons behind that. But we'll have the opportunity to come back to these reasons, I hope, during the debate, so that I don't just expose for too long. Now, coming back on the export phase of it, the trade aspect of it, it's very important how trade contributes to food security. It's only one of the components, not what I will even call, it will be difficult to evaluate the importance of different components, but it's only one of them. It allows really the signals of the market to be received correctly. It allows a real transmission between the demand and the supply of food. And we have seen there is an element, a factor that I would like to emphasize a little bit more here, because in my view that has very much been underestimated in the food crisis that we have seen again in 2008. And that has to do with the restrictions of exports, export bans. I do think that while it is important to keep trade flowing, both by reducing the subsidies and tariffs that are distortive, it is equally important to look at the export front and avoid those export bans. And just looking at one product, rice, you remember that when really, I mean, people were in the streets in 2008, remember how the rice crisis started. Towards the end of 2007, that's when India and Vietnam decided to impose export bans on rice. They imposed export bans on rice, and very few months later, already beginning January, we saw then Few other countries, rice is mainly produced, the main producers are in the Asian region, and we saw few other big producers starting to impose as well export bans. Simply India felt, after Vietnam exposed its export bans, the demand for India rice just rise abruptly, and the prices with that. So after a few months, they also imposed their own export ban on rice. And so you had this domino effect that ended up having in 2008 an increase of export rice of more than 100%. So all that to say that, well, that had a very important effect on food security, on food affordability. So I will hand here my points, my just introductory remarks by saying it is, yes, very important to invest more in food production, hence the case of potential that is still unused on the African continent, is starting being used, but still very much unexplored. And it is equally important to keep the transmission between demand and supply open and functioning. I'll stop here for now.
Thank you very much. It brings back the issue also of governance clearly that I hope we'll pick up later. How do we make sure that there is a diversity in production so the concentration issue is resolved not for the sake of one country but for the globe as a whole? And of course, how do we deal with trade bans? Either it should be done on the national, regional, international level. I want to pass the word to Ambassador Manuel Domingos Augusto, who will bring a diplomatic perspective as well, where he serves as a State Secretary in the Ministry of External Relations of the Republic of Angola.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody. I think that the intervention of Madame Valentin paved the way for my few remarks. I would like to concentrate more on our vision, how to tackle this problem, than on the reasons, because I think that the reasons have been very clear stated here, some of the reasons at least. But our vision are now to tackle this problem. For us, the food security is an issue, and as was said by the moderator at the beginning, is not only the absence of food. Food security is a more complex phenomenon, and is now not only a local phenomenon, but is a global phenomenon. Normally, a few years ago, when we would speak about hunger, lack of food, we would think in Africa. But we can see that the food security now is not just an African problem, it's a global problem, and it requires global solutions. From our perspective, the Angolan perspective, we need to take some new orientations, both on the political and economic sphere. On the political sphere, we think that new policies must be adopted based on elaborating comprehensive programs that involves private sector and rural population in order to create partnership between them. Allow banks to provide loans for agricultural development without discrimination. Develop local, regional, and national markets, including infrastructures needed for the distribution and transportation of food. Abandon the policy of food donation and embarking and engaging rural population to produce their local and traditional food, instead of convincing them to adopt the imported foods. Promote free trade of agricultural products. This requires that developed countries should not continue imposing barriers on agricultural trade products originating from developing countries. Let's take, by example, the AGOA and the Cotonou Protocol, which links some African countries with the United States and European Union, respectively. These agreements have not produced an environment which can promote food security because of the conditional ties imposed on the products coming from Africa and Pacific regions. In order to overcome these problems, for instance, in Angola, after the achievement of peace in 2002, the government established food security as one of its priorities. And for that, and in coherence with what I just said, the government of Angola created a bank, what we call Bank of Development of Angola. This bank is aimed at supporting agriculture and entrepreneurship in general, Angolan entrepreneurship. As you know, Angola is an oil producer country, and we can avoid hunger and famine crisis by importing products. What we do now, we have oil and we import products, so we don't have famine, we don't have a problem of food security. But for how long? So what the government decided, and that was 5 years ago, more or less, 6 years ago, when the oil price was so high, the government decided to create this bank, and this bank is funded by a fixed percentage from the oil revenues. 5% of the oil revenues is for this bank. And this bank is aimed at financing Angolan entrepreneurship only. We had an initial capital for credit for $200 million. And 5 years after this measure was taken, we start seeing some results. As you know, Angola is next door to Namibia, and through Namibia to South Africa. Up to 5 years ago, Angola was importing potatoes, tomato from South Africa. And Angola is a fertile country. But of course, we had a problem. Because of the long war, most of the fertile areas were affected by landmines. So one of the big efforts of the government is the demining of these fertile and agricultural areas. Meantime, we are trying to search new areas where we're not so affected by war, where we can implement some of the projects. And I don't want to be so optimistic, but we think in our national strategy for agriculture that in less than 10 years, we will be self-sufficient in basic food stuff. So we have, after the creation of this bank, we established national strategy for food security and nutrition. Because there was something, a good point raised here. It's not just to give food, it's to give food with the quality. Otherwise, the effects can be even worse. So the nutrition is very much linked in our national strategy with the food supply and food production. But we also think that we can do much, but we can't guarantee food security by ourselves. So we think that we must have a regional strategy. And Angola, very recently, and that's why I mentioned it, less than 1 month, Angola assumed the presidency of the SADC region, Southern Africa Development region, which comprises South Africa. And the program of the Angolan government for its presidency is food security. Because we think that our region is very much affected by drought, some of the area. So we need to prevent. And so we are proposing to the region the creation of one fund, agriculture fund of SADC, where the countries, the wealthiest country, will, like South Africa, Angola, because of oil, will contribute in order to balance the gaps on the food supply in the region. So these are some of the practical examples, and I prefer to go and not to go for the theories, actually, because I'm not an expert on food, but just enlightening some of the concrete measures we are taking in order to address this problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are beginning to see the dimension, so the trade dimension, very important, but also political and legislative dimension, both at national and regional level. I would like to pass the word to Dr. Jose Humberto de Brito Cruz, who also brings both the diplomatic but also academic perspective on this issue from Brazil.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think that it is somehow unfortunate that we have to be discussing food security, because it is a consequence of the fact that in so many parts of the world this is still a very big problem. The statistics is that over 1 billion people still suffer from hunger and malnutrition. And well, this is unfortunate. But it is a good thing, at least, that the issue is now high on the agenda. This is something that is clear. We have had a number of high-level meetings dedicated to the question of food security, of the eradication of hunger, and I think this is positive, and the fact that we are gathered here in this panel is also an evidence of this. I think Brazil's historical experience on this issue is somehow interesting because it is illustrative of some of the main aspects involved in the question of food security, and some aspects which, by the way, have already been mentioned in the previous presentations. In fact, Brazil has a paradoxical situation, a paradoxical history on the question of food security, because the country is, nowadays, it has always had this the destiny of being a major food producer. Brazil has all the conditions to be a major food producer and, more than that, to be a major food exporter. And nonetheless, until very recently, Brazil has displayed an incomprehensible level of hunger and malnutrition. And incomprehensible, I mean, for a country with the kind of agricultural resources that Brazil has. The explanation of this paradox, of course, is the acute level of inequality in the Brazilian society. And, but fortunately, this has been changing, and this has been changing in a very radical manner. And what I would like to focus on this presentation is on two aspects, which I could call two success stories in dealing with the question of food security in Brazil. Two success stories that have made an enormous difference for Brazilians, especially for those who are poorer and who were closer to the problem of hunger and malnutrition. The first success story is something that is by now, I think, well known, even outside Brazil, which is a program called Zero Hunger. In Portuguese, we call it Fome Zero. It's a program that has been established by President Lula when he started his first term in office in 2003. And this program has, first of all, it's a very important point, it has established as a major national priority to eliminate hunger. President Lula said, well, it will be my most important goal in government to make sure that every Brazilian has at least 3 meals a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. If I achieve that, I'll be satisfied. And he said that from the beginning. So this was an important message, and I think it's not a small issue, because political leadership and political priority for this question is something that is important, because you need to mobilize society's resources in order to deal with the question of food security. And if you don't have leadership, you cannot mobilize resources in the amount that is necessary. So based on this political priority, this program has adopted very concrete and very effective measures that have had a very significant impact over a few years. It has had a very positive impact, and all the statistics show that in Brazil. There are studies based. It's not easy to evaluate and assess the level of malnutrition, for example, but the most indicators, like, for example, seeing the development of children from 0 to 4, which is one of the most important indicators of hunger and malnutrition. This kind of indicator has changed very radically in Brazil over the last 10 years. And how was this achieved? Very quickly, I will comment. First of all, through a massive transfer of income to poor people. There's the main pillar of the program is something that is called the Bolsa Família. I don't know how to translate that in English. It would be family purse, but it's a program through which poor and very poor families, those are families whose income is below 140 reais a day. That would be more or less $90 a day, not a day, a month. And the very poor family are those that are below 70 reais, which is probably below $40 a month. So these families have been able to receive a transfer of resources, of income. Every month they have a card, and it's interesting that the card is given not to the husband but to the mother, to the wife, because it has been found that women are more responsible than men in dealing with the money, and the money is given on certain conditions. The family has to prove that the children have been attending school, that the children have been vaccinated properly. So if the family fulfills these conditions, it receives a minimum amount of income. And why is this related to food security? Well, for a very simple reason, because when you're very poor, the first thing you do when you get income is you go to a supermarket and you buy food, because that's the first need. And so this program, this part of the program is, I think, the most important. And it's each family gets every year an average of $650 US, which is a monthly average of $54. It's not that much if you think of only one family, but it makes a lot of difference, because it's difference between starving and being able at least to buy the minimum amount of food. And there's another aspect of access to food that is also part of the Zero Hunger program. This existed already before President Lula, but it was strengthened in his government, which is a program of distribution of school meals. The numbers are very impressive, but in Brazil, every day, at least every school day, 47 million meals are distributed to children in school, which is something that is not only good for food security, it's also good for education, because it's an incentive for kids to go to school, because they know they will be fed there at least. Even if they don't learn anything, they will have a meal. But this is also very important, and it's been going on. It's a huge success, I would say. And linked to that is a program of support to family agriculture by means of credit to smallholders that do family agriculture. And why is this important? This is important because it is perhaps not obvious, but family agriculture is responsible for 70% of food production in Brazil. So by supporting family agriculture, in fact, we are supporting the production of food, and we are making food available for poor people. There's also a number of details. I think we don't have the time to go into that right now, but one interesting detail is that in the distribution of school meals, there has been a decision that at least 30% of the food utilized for school meals, for this program of distribution, has to come from family agriculture, which is a huge stimulus for this sector of agricultural production. So if I may make a comment here, I think this success of in Brazil is an illustration of the fact that was mentioned precisely by the moderator in her introduction, that the question of food security is really not, or it's not always, at least, and it's not mostly a problem of availability of food. It's a problem of access to food. This is a thesis that is well known. It has been discussed by Mr. Amartya Sen in a famous study about the famine in Bengal in India in 1943, and where he proved that, well, the food was there, that there was food available. The problem was that because of the circumstances of that situation, people didn't have the income necessary to have access to food. So I think the Brazilian experience very much proves this thesis. And this brings me to my second point, which I would like to make here, and which is the second success story in Brazil, which is how we have been able to increase productivity in agriculture. And this is an essential part of the story, because if we had not been able to do that, well, the whole situation would be very different. I would quote one piece of information that illustrates this. Brazil is estimated to be one of the countries that have most increased on a per capita basis its production of food since 1970. Brazil is one of the 3 countries that have most increased food production on a per capita basis, the other 2 being China and Malaysia. And why did this happen? This happened because of very important productivity gains in agriculture. And by the way, productivity gains are not only important for food security, they are also important for the environment. Why is that? Because if you don't have productivity gains, the only way to increase agricultural output is by increasing the surface area that is cultivated. And well, in the case of Brazil, from a certain point, if you have to extend the area, you will have to go into areas that are protected, that are areas of environmental protection. So, and there's a very interesting number that illustrates this, is that it has, in a study carried out by Brazilian scientists, they found that if we were still using today the same agricultural technologies that were available in the 1970s, and if we were to produce the same amount of food that we are now able to produce, we would have to increase the production area by some 90 million hectares. That is equivalent to more or less the area of 4 small European states. That is, you can very easily figure out what that would have meant in terms of deforestation and loss of biodiversity. But very fortunately, we are not using technology from the 70s. On the contrary, Brazil has been able to make significant investment and development of agricultural technology, and there are a number of very good agricultural science schools, and there is a system of research for agriculture. And the keystone of this system is an institution which some of you may have heard about. It's called Embrapa. It's a Brazilian Corporation for Agricultural Research, and the Brazilian acronym is Embrapa. Well, Embrapa has been responsible for many important achievements. Perhaps the most remarkable was the transformation of a huge extension of land that we have in Brazil. We call this Cerrado, which is somehow similar to the African savannas, which were previously considered as very poor land. And it was very common for Brazilians to complain about, oh my God, why were we not blessed with more fertile lands? Why were we not blessed with more temperate climates? You know, why do we have all this cerrado? Well, Embrapa did research on this question, and they have been able to develop ways of dealing with the soil, new seeds, etc., that have transformed, have made the Cerrado into one of the most productive areas in the world, and certainly in Brazil. The Cerrado is nowadays an essential part of Brazilian agriculture, and it was not like that. Like 50 years back, it was not like that. 30 years back, it was not like that. So this is a major success story, which I think is worth reflecting upon, because I think it gives an example of what can be done. And when we think of the situation in Africa, we can Mrs. Ruabiza mentioned the fact that Africa was a net exporter of food and has become a net importer. And I think the need for investment and the need for developing productivity in agriculture in Africa is, I believe, a crucial priority. And in fact, Brazil has been able to offer cooperation to a number of African countries on this question. And Embrapa has set, this Brazilian Corporation for Research in Agriculture, has established a number of outposts in Africa. They have laboratories in Accra, in Mozambique. I think they have also done work in Angola, if I'm not mistaken. And I think this is something that we're very glad to be able to do, because we believe this is the way to follow in order to deal with the question of food security. Now, so the thing is, everybody knows the numbers. We will be 9 billion people in 2050, and the biggest challenge is how do we increase production to make sure that all these people will have adequate food. So what the Brazilian experience suggests, to sum up, is number one, reduce poverty. Because if you reduce poverty, if you assure a minimum income to people, they will not starve. Number two, promote food production, and most of all, promote food productivity. I would just like to, well, I would have a few more comments to make, but perhaps I have extended myself too much, so I would leave those for the discussion. Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you. Would be happy to pick them up. I'm noticing the major factors on the issue of food security that are being proposed in terms of what are the mechanisms. So we looked at trade first, we look at legislation second. The two that I'm taking away now is one on political leadership, and second is the focus on technology. What can technology offer to us as we look at food security? The last comment on technology and efficiency reminds me of another statistic that I picked up recently on the nutritional value of the food that we are producing. The recent studies, for example, of the 43 garden crops across the last 20 years show that on average we are losing up to 38% of nutritional value on average across all crops. That was riboflavin, for example, has decreased on average 38% across all crops. Vitamin C on average decreased 20%, protein 6%. So we are producing the same kilos of tomatoes, it just happened to have 20% less vitamin C. How do we also think about technology, not in volume, but in the quality of nutrition? So trade legislation, leadership, technology, what are the mechanisms that we could pick up? And I want to turn that question to the person who looks at all of the things combined in his capacity of overseeing the State of the Futures report. Jerome Glenn has been working in the field of understanding and guiding the future for many, many years. So the floor is yours, Jerome.
Thank you. Maybe during the discussion time, we can talk about some points. I made notes while people were speaking. One, I want to talk later a little bit about how iron and protein are important for babies and how much of Africa is mentally retarded because of that, because of the way that the food is handled in the villages and how that can be changed relatively low technology-wise. Two, changing the energy base of the world through solar satellites. I just met with a gentleman from China yesterday. They've agreed that they're going to do long-term satellite stuff. Japan regarded last year. If we put wireless transmission into Africa, it would change Africa dramatically. You're not going to get wires all over Sudan anyway. The idea of China buying up the agricultural top lands in Africa at a rapid pace is not being paid attention to enough. New governance systems for rapid change of economic bases and agricultural bases through trends institutions, and synthetic biology, which I think will be a larger biological revolution than the industrial or industrial revolutions in the past, and we'll put the two of them together into one revolution. That's what I'd talk about later. But what I want to talk about first, and most importantly, is the price of food. In my last State of the Future, co-author Last State of the Future, one of the things that hit me like a ton of bricks is the price of food. Now, you remember in '98, or a couple of years went up real fast, it came back down, went up, back again. So I looked at the factors, and generally these are the factors that increase the price of food. Population. You know, we just mentioned we're going to have another 2 billion people in 39 years, which is more than the entire population of the Earth just 100 years ago. We're going to do that in 39 years. The rising affluence increases the price of food, especially in China and India. The diversion of grain, mostly corn, into biofuels. 1 out of 3 ears of corn in the United States goes to food. 2 of the 3 go into energy. That drives up the price. Soil erosion and deterioration of the quality of soil drives up the price because you've got to put more fertilizer in certain areas you can't use. The loss of croplands because we've got an extra 2 billion people coming up, you know, and 80% are going to move into the urban areas, but they're also covering up a lot of suburban areas, which means cropland loss like crazy. Increasing fertilizer costs because a lot of it is hooked to the oil price, and not a whole lot of people are looking at $18 a barrel anymore. Decreasing pollination. I don't know if you know this, but the bee population of the world's going down. Well, where are we going to pollinate from? I mean, you know, you get rid of those bees, you know, you got to by eating sand, I guess. I want you to notice that all of these factors, this is the, what, that's only the 7th factor. I'm going to go through 16 quickly. All of these factors are going in the wrong direction. What I want to get to you is that the concept of food and price is going to lead to a very unstable world indefinitely unless we change the food and energy and economic basis of the world. But I'll come back to that a little later. 8, market speculation. Remember the oil price jumped up to 150? It wasn't because of supply and demand, it was because of speculation. Where are you going to put your money? If you think that gold is going up high enough, where else are you going to put your money? You might put into all kinds of food futures, right? Food futures was a good idea to guarantee the farmer, but now it can turn into a speculation to drive up the price like crazy. 9, global food reserves are the lowest in 25 years. And that's also going to push prices up because you don't have enough backup. The aquifers around the world are in trouble, all around the world, which then lowers your quality of what you can bring in for agricultural production. The falling water tables around the world. The water tables are falling on all the continents of the world as we speak. And some in India as much as 3 to 5 meters a year. There's already forced migration in China for the last 7 years. And I'm not talking about the Three Gorges Dam. I'm saying that when all of a sudden the well goes dry, you got 80,000 people there. You got to move into another area of 200,000 people, and that's social conflict. Climate change by itself, we'll move into 12 now, increasing droughts. You understand, for those people who don't get this, forgive me for repeating it for those who already know it. When you change the hydrologic cycle, obviously in areas where there's water in circle, you put heat into it, what do? You increase it, which means you get more rain and flooding. Where you don't have it, you get more desertification. So when some idiot says, well, the climate scientists are all crazy, it's flooding and it's desert, I mean, you can't have both. Yes, you can. It just means that they're a bunch of ignorant idiots, and you should tell them that and stop this crap because it's dangerous. We don't let people walk around with nuclear bombs and throw them around. Long term, this ignorance is an atomic bomb to the future of civilization. Because, and I digress, there is a microbe that quite a few years in the past, when we had warming of the oceans and some CO2 increase, was responsible for one of the mammal die-offs. It's a chemical pollution that comes out of this particular microbe. You know, so don't worry about the sun expanding. Don't worry about the water coming. We could actually poison ourselves to death in about 100 to 150 years or so and knock off the land. So these are serious things. We've got to have no tolerance for ignorance. It's dangerous to us. Okay, increasing droughts obviously messes up agriculture, increases the price. Increasing flooding knocks out some agricultural stuff, increases the price. Changing of the growing seasons have changed as we cause it. Now, this is okay for Russia, and this is okay for Canada. We don't mind them. That's okay. We're happy to do it. But those changes don't get a net gain. I mean, it's a net gain for Siberia, but it's not a net gain for the world. Let's see, what else we got here? 15. The Glacial Mountains. We all know about this, and somebody says, oh, my God, those scientists messed up on their calculation. They're cheating. You know, that's like one sand in an ocean of issue. Anybody been to Kilimanjaro in the last 5 years? Everybody been to Kilimanjaro 40 years ago? It ain't like even close to it. We know that the glaciers are melting. Wake up, folks. We know that that changes the melt time for agriculture and also less water for agriculture. You can go to rivers that were wide 30 years ago, and those rivers now are narrow, which then feeds agriculture less, so less production goes on. Eventually, salt water rises as well, eventually, and that means that Bangladesh, that had nice freshwater agriculture, is dead. Now, so, 2 ideas to address this, and there's a lot of ideas, but 2 that haven't gotten a lot of play in the press. One is saltwater agriculture. It is believed that there's about 10,000 species that can grow in salt water. Out of the 10,000, it's reasonable to assume that 10 to 100 can probably be of commercial value for humans to eat, for animals to eat, to make biofuel for alternatives, to be a carbon sink, because along the coastlines of the world, you can irrigate. Now, let's make this is the beach here, baked coral or baked clay area, and over here is the water. You can cut channels into here, and you can irrigate with salt water, which gets rid of the #1 problem of agriculture, rain. You don't care about rain in the Sahel deserts along the coastlines of Africa or along coasts of Asia. Rain is an irrelevant issue all of a sudden. That's an amazing comment just by itself. Rain doesn't matter to agriculture. And for one of the first cuts, you can put an area, put shrimp, grow them, then have their waste material go in to fertilize the next one of crops, and you go the whole sequence like this. And an area that was not producing anything of economic value is now producing economic value, and it tends to be in poor areas. So this is an economic development program as well as food security program. Also, it is good for environment because if we do the cap and trade right, the risk for this investment is taken care of because you're putting green where there was brown. And that's nice for the environment. A lot of agriculture, algae can grow in this stuff as well. So you can go, and these are high-priced stuff because you can sell, we do this in one of our projects in Korea, you can sell algae for ladies' products, believe it or not. That's that, you know, you start with small and you build up to jet fuel later. But you start with small little products, it's you can eat it, there's all kinds of nice stuff. But there's tremendous untapped potential. If you take a look at the world map, how much of the coastlines of the world are uninhabited in poor areas, tropical areas as well, which is a nice little benefit, that are baked clay. It's not really wonderful areas. And this area could be a garden. You can just garden the coastlines of the world. Another one is, I'm sure most of you know, and if you don't, I'll go into a lecture, so prevent that by saying you already know if you don't. Meat production is an extraordinary drain on agriculture. The majority of the fresh water for humans is used in agriculture. The majority of that water is used to produce food to support animals. And you don't get your return on investment right off the bat. You got to let the doggone thing grow for a while before you hack its meat out. Right? Well, there's alternatives now. If you do a Google search on pure meat, or that's my term, growing meat without agriculture, just growing meat without agriculture, you will see there's tons of research that's been already done on this. We've already produced meat without growing animals. There's a variety of ways to do it. You can take the stem cells out of the umbilical cord of a cow, goat, or pig and stimulate it and produce the meat. That's one way. You can also take your Kobe beef, the Japanese don't like this one, take the Kobe beef and you clone this sort of thing. So there's a whole lot of ways to do this. And it's already been done, full stop. Now, it does not look like a T-bone steak. All right, we're not there yet. But you don't need a T-bone steak for sausage. You don't need a T-bone steak for a hot dog. You don't need a T-bone steak for emergency foods. Now, what's important about this, aside from all the environmental factors and water factors and food security factors, another factor here is that I mentioned before about iron and protein for children around the world. If you don't get enough iron and protein at an early age, your brain doesn't develop. We're going to learn how to get around that, but we haven't gotten there yet. So this means that a child that might have a normal IQ of 100 will have an IQ of a lot less. And it's pretty hard to run a knowledge economy of the future with a bunch of mentally retarded people. So if you could do food supplements of pure meat, because the nice thing about meat is it's got iron and protein together, and that's the combination you give. If you give just protein or just iron, it doesn't work right for the brain. It's got to be together. It's extremely important. So saltwater agriculture and growing meat without animals are two of the things I'd throw on the future. We're talking here about the future of food security, and I can get into the sort of the synthetic biology and genome research and all that sort of stuff, which is hopefully will do even better. But as long as we keep making dumb decisions and ignoring these kind of things, then we're going to walk into a very unstable future, because the price of food is going to go way beyond 120 to 150%, like some people are forecasting. You've seen oil prices just a few years ago. Remember, it was $18 a barrel. I remember being in meetings like this on energy stuff, and they say, well, if we can get the oil price up to $18 a barrel, we can trigger investments. Man, if we could get it to $18 a barrel, I would kiss the feet of these guys. We're not going to see oil go down to, I don't think, 18. And I don't think you're going to see food price come down unless we really do some of these things and do them as fast as we can. This is extremely serious. Several years ago, the United States and the UK did a little study on the factors of instability in the world, and they concluded that half the world was unstable. They didn't even have this in there. So it is reasonable to assume we're walking into a Mad Max world unless we make decisions differently. We cannot do business as usual. If somebody is standing up and saying, let's do it the way we were doing it before, they are a threat to the future environmental security of the planet.
Thank you, John.
And that's all I had to say.
Well, I want to open up a discussion and then open it up also to the audience. I think we've heard many different dimensions, and it's very easy to start kind of peeling the onion and see that food security is pretty much everything you can imagine on the world political, economic, social arena. Any issue you take it is some way connected to food security. Any global challenge of our day for sure is connected to food security. So how do we unpeel the onion and come to some sort of fruitful progress on this? I think there are two fundamental questions wrapped into each other. One is who, and second is what. We've heard some of who here, whether it's an individual government, regional association or alliance of some sort, global organization like the World Trade Organization, or any other entity on the question of who. There's of course also quite a few suggestions that you shared the best practices on what can be done to resolve this complex issue. So I want to start the discussion of the panel with the question of who. Considering the multidimensional, complex nature of food security, who should be tackling this problem, in your view, to make sure that it's done in the most efficient but also effective way? If you were to think on the past, but also look into the future, in your view, what kind of entity should be tackling this problem, and whose problem is this? Also, I'm curious at the national level, what state department, ministry, or any other entity should be responsible for this issue. Anyone would like to pick it up?
Well, a very just a short way on the WHO. I think all the presentations here have just made it clear that it is all of us. This is an issue that has to receive top priority in countries. And I will say that the example of Brazil is an example that speaks to all. It is feasible, provided is considered to be a top priority in a country. It is feasible, provided, as Manuel said, for the SADC presidency, it is considered to be a top priority for the entire region of SADC. Now, how will that become a top priority? Well, we all have a way of impacting government. I mean, as citizens of our governments, we all have a way of impacting what will become a top priority in a region. So on the question of WHO, I would just say that, yes, the responsibilities are not the same. I would say with maybe one exception, and you referred earlier to the famous economist Hamming. One exception is that the reality is that the poor don't have the possibility to impact the decisions most of the time. They are paying the price of food insecurity, and yet they have less, you know, they are the ones who are the less impacting what will be done at the national level, or at regional level, or at global level. So that will be on the who. On the what, I think we have expanded. Many of us have expanded on what could be done, and the number of things could be done. And once again, well, it was mentioned the growing middle class, or a more growing healthier population. A growing healthier population that you just referred to, and coming from the emerging economies that is changing the diet as well, eating more meat because can afford more meat. Is that sustainable in terms of the pressure that it puts? Shouldn't we all question simply our diet as well? So a number of things could be done. Personally, I will be best placed to discuss at policy level, but I get back to that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now, on the question of who should deal with this question, my comment would be, I think on first, in a very basic level, the answer is national governments, because it's not thinkable that a national government will not take charge in a question that is so crucial and so important as food security. So I think the main responsibility lies with national governments. But, and it's a very important but, this does not mean that we should envisage food security only as a national problem. It has to be seen as a global problem. We have to have a global perspective on food security. Why is that? Well, the reason is that even if one country cannot be totally, it cannot rely completely on other countries for its food security. That's a valid point that was made by Mrs. Ruwabiza, and it's important. But on the other hand, it would be a big mistake not to take into account the fact that some countries are able to produce a surplus of food, and while other countries are perhaps or will always be net importers of food. So we have to take that into account. So our equation must be global. I mean, the decisions are taken at the national level, but it is essential to maintain a global perspective. It's one of those cases in which you have, to use a Node slogan, to think globally and act locally. And I think this is really the case. And why is that? Because if you have an exclusively national perspective on this issue, I'm afraid we will end up not with food security, but with a distorted version of food security, which is food protectionism. And it is very important, I think, to draw the line between food security and food protectionism, because food security is a shared goal, is a universally accepted objective. Food protectionism not only is not an answer, but I think it is part of the problem, because it distorts the markets and it creates conditions that are not conducive to the needed increase in food production. So in the long run, food protectionism is something that erodes food security. So what we need is, I think, to strike an intelligent balance between a global and a national perspective. So the answer to the question of who is not easy, I think, because if we accept a simple answer, we might end up with a false answer, indeed, because countries would believe that they have to simply protect and they have to be self-sufficient. That every country in the world has to be self-sufficient in food, which is would be a form of would be a wrong answer, because some other countries are able to help and to provide food in excess, and this should be taken into account in our equation.
Just to clarify that while I support food productivity and the fact that we need, I think there is a clear need to exploit where potential exists for more production. It's quite clear that there is a clear difference between that and food sufficiency. Some countries will never become food sufficient. Some countries, by the fact of nature, depend on other countries for the food security. Yemen cannot produce the food Yemen needs. Egypt cannot produce the food Egypt needs. Simply there is no enough water for Egypt to produce the wheat that they consume. So it's just to make that clear that let's make a clear difference between food security and food sufficiency. And clearly my emphasis on trade is that a number of countries depend on trade for their food security. That could be poor countries, but it could be richer countries such as Japan. They depend on trade. I mean, in the memory of Japan, it's still very fresh, what the ban on soybean that was imposed by President Nixon in the 70s did to their food security. So a number of countries depend on functioning of trade. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I see that we have a question in the audience, so we would need a microphone. But as I'm listening to you, I am wondering, when will we see the UN Security Council having an emergency meeting due to food security rather than the traditional approaches, and when the food security will make as much headline in the daily life of everyone in the world as headlines that we're seeing on the TVs right now. It is such a delayed problem. It has a delayed effect that most people don't feel the urgency until it's really too late and we are in the midst of either extreme famine or extreme social unrest. So how do we manage that at the global level? Becomes an issue. There's a question in the audience. Yeah, it's right here.
Thank you very much. Arie van de Brand from the Netherlands. I'm a farmer, and I'm the president of the Groupe de Bruges, which is an independent European think tank about the future of agriculture and European policy, founded by Edgar Pisani, former Minister of Agriculture in France, and in the 70s he was also European Commissioner for Third World in Brussels. We are discussing a lot about the issues you are putting on the table. So I would like to give you a few comments from our, say, thinking practice and also the practice. We think that for agricultural policy, not only in Europe but around the world, we need in fact a paradigm shift. And I go to Mr. Glenn, who already mentioned all the negative aspects or negative implications of the last 50 years of modernization of agriculture. And it has been a technological modernization necessary to increase productivity and production. But today we are really confronted, and you made a beautiful list, and I think the list can be bigger, of negative effects on the long term for the food security. And that paradigm shift should not be only a new technological modernization, which is important, but it should be an ecological modernization, including an ecological intensification of agriculture, because we are losing, and that's another problem, so many species, not only biodiversity in the way of farm birds, but also of cows, of plants, of species. So that paradigm shift should not be only a program for organic agriculture or a program for farm birds. No, it should be built in the heart of the agricultural policy. And when you're asking who, maybe we should stop talking about agricultural policy and about ministers of agriculture. Maybe we should say ministers of food, or maybe one step further, as in Austria, where today it's called the Ministry of Life. And I think there you come to a very important thing. And I think you can read it also in one of the latest reports of the UN, Agroecology, written by Olivier de Schutter, which is also saying there are more roads for sustainable development, for food security, than only a GMO approach. Right? Why should we stimulate farmers to jump from 1,000 hectares of wheat to 10,000 with GMOs, or do it in a traditional way and modernize that and let them make the step from 1,000 to 2,000 kilograms by hectare? So we also have to reframe the thinking in the international arena. And in the international arena, and I'm very happy that BLAD Strategic Forum has made a choice to put it on the agenda, I think in general the agriculture and food and farmers question is very much underestimated in the political arena by our actual political leadership. When you go back to the founders, the fathers and the mothers of the WTO, of the GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and when you were reading what they were doing in the 40s and the 50s to create the GATT, it was to avoid war, it was to create geopolitical stability based on agricultural policy. And I think we have forgotten that history a little bit. And also, when you're talking yesterday with the Chinese minister, I was very happy that he said, we have to stop thinking about stereotypes. But also there's a stereotype of being a farmer. That is, you are backwards and you're not belonging to the modern society. So also we have to reframe the notion of farmers. And not only saying employment in the rural areas, employment in agriculture, as a result of the agricultural policy. And that means rural exodus, the rural exodus. And that rural exodus was possible in the 50s and the 60s because there was enough employment in industry. I presume and I predict that the next 10 years there will be not that employment in industry. So we have to think about creating new employment in the rural areas. And perhaps the process of ecological modernization can help in that. And it's very interesting when you go back to history and go back to Genesis of the Bible, of the Old Testament. That was also an ecological story. When there was the big flood with the Ark of Noah, why did God say to Noah, not only put your boat full of people, because that was being a normal human reaction, put a boat full of people and go. No, he said, of every animal species you have to bring on board. So that was an ecological decision with the flood, or as a result of modern agricultural policies in that areas, I think is a very wise lesson. And I hope at least that the international governance will go for that. And then I go with you, basic is the instability of prices. And we have to address that in the international arena for geopolitical reasons. Thank you. And I'd like to know, or you agree with my view.
In the current State of the Future, 2011 State of the Future, ecological agriculture is in there. We have the print's 100 pages and the CD is 8,500 pages. The details goes into the CD-ROM. And just last month I had to go off to the President of the Dominican Republic for some of the recovery stuff as that would be an approach there. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean I'm asking everybody to do that. I tend to look at policy to a large degree like a bouillabaisse soup or an opera. You know, I'm not asking a violin to be a trumpet. Nice thing about the opera analogy is that the trumpets want the violins to be tuned, so unlike the social one where everybody sort of competes and so forth. So what you're talking about, and I hope everybody heard that and find out some more about it, is extremely important and should be done. We're going to have to do a lot of, and to me that's part of the opera. I don't see it as the whole thing. That's why I pushed two things that would normally get pushed, which is changing the meat production and changing the use of salt water, which also then frees up fresh water and frees up some land for what you're talking about as well. So what you're talking about, in my judgment, is extremely important. It is not well attended to in the world yet. I hope it will, but it's part of the overall garden of the operations. So that would be my comment.
It's greening the system.
Yeah, yeah, right. And, right, absolutely. And another thing I would add on there, you started to touch on it when you said we need a paradigm shift. Completely with you. We should do some sort of clever phrases like we have to produce what we produce, how we produce it, how we distribute it, and what we eat. We've got to do all that. One of the studies we did last year was what are the seeds of the future of arts, entertainment, and media? In a similar way like opera was invented, what are the early elements back in 1597, and then they put them together and they made, boom, opera. We're in the process of trying to do that on a global basis, and part of it is to get serious stuff to the world, what's important about the future. I mean, knowing how many, whether O.J. Simpson's glove fits or not, doesn't matter to the future civilization. What you just talked about does. But everybody covers O.J. Simpson, and they don't cover what you talked about. So if you give me maybe about 6 months, we'll be ready to start to put a lot of these messages in global media systems. Because there's no two ways around it. Now, one other thing about, related to that and the who part, which brings to mind the business about food. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in 1968-70, and I worked in leprosy and tuberculosis, which meant that I had to hang out with witch doctors, traditional medicine men. Because, you know, I would do something that said, that's cool, the medicine man says do it, and the people do it. So that was the power system, so that's what I work with. And I noticed the business about when you have without the birth control stuff, you got one baby after the next, which means you got 2 babies on the breast, which is okay for, you know, for the nutrition. It's okay. It's not great, but it's okay. It's working. When the 3rd baby comes up, one comes off and one goes on. This one's hand is not developed enough to take the grain or whatever the main base is, and the leaves or the fish or whatever the other potential proteins are, beans. So they just take pieces of it. And as a result, you can walk across Africa, much of Sahel today, and you'll see a large number of children with very sort of reddish hair on the temples. This is kwashiorkor, protein malnutrition. This means there's not enough iron and protein to make the hair strong and black. Right? Now, not every kid gets that. Just like in the European tradition, not every kid gets pimples. But we talk about pimples as a normal condition. And when my use of Chinyanja, the language I learned in East Africa, was that was a normal condition like pimples, which meant that most of the people didn't get the right amount at that time. So how do you get around this? You take the same food, you don't change any production. I mean, I would like to, but you don't have to change any production. You don't have to have any big program. You just have a bowl for children. You take the main part, you take this part, you mix it together, you put it there, clunk. Now, how do you get that done? You hang out with the witch doctors. The witch doctor's kids do it. Well, the witch doctor's full of power, man. Power is a big, cool thing. How does the witch doctor have his kids eat? So that's what we were doing. It's that kind of stuff on a local basis on the WHO business. from the local base all the way up to the global media sort of stuff we have to do. But I agree with you, your main point, we have to look at the whole ecology of the thing. I think the synthetic biology is going to be a tidal wave, and as far as I can tell, the best we can do is to think about ahead of it now, not later, and do the best of it. Like, imagine if we had done this for the Industrial Revolution 250 years ago. We'd be in a different place. We should do that now about synthetic biology. You know, what's the best, what's the worst, how do we manage that? Which, by the way, I'm not talking about GMOs. Because the old GMOs, you take a DNA and you're changing a part there. What I'm talking about is the print shop, where you're taking different parts of species. This is out of a whale, this is out of a leprosy bacillus, this is out of your nose. I mean, putting together completely different things that never existed before. That's something, and that's a big deal. That's the tidal wave. That's a tidal wave. You know, you remember the stuff about, you heard about the Genome Project, everybody? Yes? Mm-hmm. No? Yes? My English may not be great. The Genome Project, they talked about the alphabet of life. What do you do with an alphabet? You put together words, sentences, paragraphs, chapters, books, libraries, civilizations. Right? That was the purpose of the Genome Project, to figure out how you take from all these different things and recombination, so that maybe someday we make a microbe that can eat the plaque in my brain so I don't get old and senile. I think that's okay. Some of it I don't think is okay. But we are ignorant, seriously ignorant about these potentials, and we've got to start going through it as fast as possible. So I would encourage your group to sift through the stuff and find out, separate out the good from the bad. And that's, again, beyond the normal GMO stuff.
Thank you, back to the what and the best practices. We heard some, one with the example of the Bank of Development in Angola, two with Brazil. What are, in your views, the best practices at the policy level, at the individual project level, some that we heard already, that have proven track or have a potential for the future solutions to the food security problem? What kind of advice or direction should we go at this point based on the best practices we're seeing around the world? Yeah, Ambassador.
Thank you. I think that, as was stated here also, some of the measures that we must take from now, according to the experts like Mr. Glenn just states, must be feasible, not in all countries, of course, and especially not necessarily on the recipient countries, on the country needs. And that brings us to another problem, which I try to figure out from the beginning, is that when we say the governments, they need to bring the private sector on board. And when we talk about the private sector, we can even talk about the multinationals who deal with foods. It's clear that, as Valentin said, not every country can attain the self-sufficient in production. Or even we can say most of the countries will not be able to do so. There, the need of a regional and even continental, but let's put it regional strategies in order to balance, to compensate. Like when we talk about SADC, we have a place in SADC where there is no water available. Countries like Lesotho, South Africa, Namibia, they don't have water. Countries like Angola, Democratic Congo, we have too much water. How to balance? So, there I think the big food processors, if we can put that way, the big companies, they have a role to play if they are willing to cooperate with the governments and other stakeholders, because definitely we will have to find solutions locally, and this locally can be extended at a regional level. So the cooperation between the public and private sector is pivotal, is crucial. And there also we think that international organizations like the WTO and all institutional or financial institutions, international financial institutions, have also a role to play. And I'm happy that the moderator say that, yeah, put a question, when at UN agenda the food security will be a priority. Because normally at UN we discuss crisis, famine, like now in the Horn of Africa, in Somalia, people are running, trying to find millions of dollars to supply Somalia. For how long? Until the next crisis. And let's not be naive. That has to be also with the food producers, the big companies, because they look, Brazil, that was a success story. And I agreed with what Mr. Brito said. Mr. Brito only didn't say that Brazil, fortunately, has a nice industrial infrastructure, which most of the countries in Africa, they don't have. And Brazil was able to produce some of the foods, and the Zero Hungry program was able to. First, the political will, of course, was clear. President Lula put it as a priority. And the whole government and institutions in Brazil embark on that program. So the political will is a starting point. That's why I mentioned what in my country as an example we are trying to do. We know that we have all the conditions, like Brazil, to have self-sufficient. We have fertile territory, we have water, we have money. So we need just to have programs, feasible programs, discipline on achievement of this program, and we will get there. But we are also conscious that we will face obstacles because we don't have technology. We need technology. We need technical cooperation. We don't have enough expertise. So, and we must be wise to see how to do. That's why, going back to SADC region, where we are talking about 240 million people, more or less. Yeah, we have one country with a high level of industrialization, which is South Africa. Yeah, but also we know that the economy of South Africa is not in the hand of the government, as it is in Angola now. So we will try to balance. So these are some facts, really. And so what to do, how to do? I think that first is to think that it's possible. Brazil is there to prove that it's possible. Second, we need political will. We need full engagement of all stakeholders, including the multinational food processors, that they can come, instead of thinking of exporting, they can produce with us in our own countries and regions. And of course, the scientific and technical aspects, as Mr. Glenn said, are important, because we also mentioned here the importance of the nutrition factor, not only the availability of the food. Yeah, but the starting point is that we need to address this problem. We need to produce food. We need to put this food available to the people. And if the countries, because as we say, a country who is budget, state budget, depending on the donations from foreign partners, maybe has no, by itself, the possibility of setting up a policy of production of self-sufficient, because we'll be always dependent, even to pay. So that's why the regional strategy is important. Those one who have liquidity, money, they can cope with those one who have expertise. This is the case of our region. We have countries with high expertise, but no money. We will see if we can cooperate and help the region to run away from this problem of food insecurity. Thank you.
I think what Mr. Augusto just said raises the question of international cooperation, especially with African countries, because he was explaining, well, for some countries in Africa, it's not that easy to make the first steps, and they need help, and this is quite clear. And I think one important fact that was not mentioned here is that I believe since the 1970s, official development assistance devoted to agriculture has decreased in percentage terms. I think it was about, in the 70s, it was about between 15 to 20% of ODA, the total amount of official development assistance provided by the richer countries to developing countries. And in recent years, it has decreased to about 3 to 4% of the total amount of aid. So this is very significant, and this is one of the factors that explain the situation of underinvestment in agriculture in Africa, which I think would be an important, I think, if we're discussing what to do, I think this would be an obvious point to start. If I may make another comment still on the what, referring to the question of food prices that was raised by Mr. Glenn, and I am thankful for his list of factors, which was pretty exhaustive. And I just have a small disagreement, not a disagreement, but perhaps a refinement, because I think what you said about the impact of biofuels is perhaps relevant in the case of corn, because corn ethanol is really produced in an amount that displaces the production of corn. And in the case of the United States, this may have had some impact. But the situation is not the same as regards sugarcane ethanol, because in the case of sugarcane ethanol, the amount of land that is used is so small. And in the case of Brazil, it's 1% of the arable land that is used for the production of sugarcane ethanol. So there's a wide consensus in Brazil that this has not had an impact on prices. You use the word grain, exactly. But there's a common misperception that biofuels in general has this impact. So this is why I thought it was interesting to make this point. But still on the question of food prices, I think a more important question, which is the fact that, and you were right to say, I think it was the very first factor you mentioned on your list, which was, or first or second, I don't know, it was the demand for food. I mean, the fact that, well, just as Brazil has been able to lift millions of people out of poverty, the first thing they do is to buy food. Well, the same thing is happening in China, in India, in many countries, in many developing countries that are growing at fast rates. So that means that the demand for food is increasing, and that has an impact on food prices. Well, we're all concerned about food prices, but let us not ignore that, well, it's a good thing. I mean, the fact that people are now able to buy food that they were not able to buy previously, well, this is precisely what we wanted to achieve. And if this has an impact on food prices, okay, let's deal with it. Because if we come to think of it, the problem of food prices, there has been a huge food price inflation in 2007 and 2008. It was even considered a crisis. Well, it was a crisis, but it was not a crisis for any of the persons present in this room. For none of us, food security was threatened. Why is that? Because our income is at a level that, well, okay, we have to spend a little more money with food, but, well, it's not a question of life and death. It is a question of life and death for very poor people. And so the answer is, well, let us not invent very complicated schemes to control food prices. Let us give people income. I think, isn't it easier to make sure that every human being has the necessary income to buy food instead of inventing complicated recipes for controlling food prices, which in fact may turn out to be recipes for disaster. Why is that? Because, well, everybody is concerned about high food prices because there are people who are poor and cannot afford the necessary food. But the experts on agriculture caution us that low food prices can be equally as dangerous for food security. Why is that? Because if you have very low food prices, there's a negative incentive for food production in the next harvest. This has happened in the world. This has happened in Africa. There's a famous situation in Ethiopia where a bumper crop that was really miraculous, it produced an enormous surplus of grain, and then in the next year, there was a very serious situation of starvation and famine. Why was that? Because many producers simply gave up production. And this was also compounded by the problem that, well, the presence of food donations that contribute to bring the price down and to make the situation impossible for local producers. So I really thank Mr. Glenn for bringing the question of food prices in a very intelligent perspective that takes into account that there are so many factors that we have to be aware that it's difficult to deal with this issue, and so perhaps it's easier to tackle the question from another angle, which is ensuring that everyone has the necessary income. Thank you.
Yes, on the what, I also think we can go straight forward on 3 words at least, and I will absolutely agree with Mr. De Brito that the first word is to reduce poverty. It's reduce poverty. When people can afford food, then that's the first thing they buy. And the second word, between increased investment, situations we have been, you mentioned, you referred to public aid decreasing in agriculture, but government budget in agriculture have been decreasing dramatically for more than 20 years, and we've seen that on the African continent. Just budget allocated to investment, to production, and I mean here productivity, produce where it is efficient. It is not efficient to produce food everywhere, but there are places where it is efficient, it is productive, and even in those places, sometimes let's also face the fact that not so long ago, even international finance institutions have been suggesting that, well, investment in agriculture was not such a good thing. So people have learned at very, very high cost, but this has happened as well. This has happened. So that will be the second what? Reinvest in agriculture. I will just insist on agriculture productivity and efficiency. And in mentioning efficiency, I don't think it is efficient or sustainable environmentally wise to produce simply because to produce in some countries simply because those countries can afford very, very heavy subsidies, not necessarily because it is the most efficient. Those are the most efficient places where food should be produced. So that will be, in my view, a second what, and the third what, avoid protectionism. Protectionism in food doesn't protect at all. Protectionism in food is increased food insecurity for many others. So we are interdependent in terms of food. Mentioned to the SADC region, but what is also striking is that in some regions, in one region, one country is overproducing and next country just starving. And you wonder about what's missing there, why there is no more regional trade between those countries, just to enable maize, rice to just be moved from one country to the other. Very much on the contrary. In 2008, when the rice crisis erupted, the first reflex in West Africa, Senegal imposed bans, in East Africa, Tanzania imposed bans, and so on and forth. And the effect of that was clear, is that it became, the problem became much more acute for all. So I would just suggest at least those three, I think, which may look simple, but are very complex what. Thank you.
I want to make sure that the audience also has a chance to comment or question. So if there are any commentary or questions coming in, please do let me know somehow. Yeah, we have one more time.
One more time, is possible?
No?
Yeah. I'd like to come back on the paradigm shift. If you're talking about efficiency in agriculture, I think that the efficiency of the last 15 years in the language was meaning not full cost accounting. It was producing there where it was the cheapest. That was also, and is still today, the goal of the Common Agriculture Policy in Europe. But if we take the triple P serious, profit, planet, and people, then we should say we should produce there where it is the best, not where it is the cheapest. And that's including what the example of Brazil, where you're talking about not only the program for the poor, but also the program for the family farmers. And I think it's very important that we try to redefine the notion of efficiency. Because if we are using the same efficiency as we've used in the last 50 years, we will have bigger problems in the future. So please take care with the language also in the political arena.
Okay. Is there one on the back? Yes.
My name is Tina Strafela. I come from the Slovenian Foreign Ministry, and I have a question for Mr. Glenn. Before you said, and I agree, we cannot do business as usual, and you said we need an economical change, the change of the economical system, and I would like to hear your views. How do you see that new system or that change that is needed?
If you go to the website millennium, spelled with 2 L's and 2 N's, forgiveness to the French, 2 L's and two N's, hyphen, not underlined, but hyphen project.org. And go to the State of the Future, you can get some information on how to get the CD-ROM. I think it's like $9 or it's $20, but it was 8,500 pages. It's the largest compendium of futures research history in one piece ever put together. Even Aristotle didn't do this one. In there is a study specifically on next economics. And what the assumption we did this during the financial crisis. So we figured we got to do something, but we weren't going to solve the financial crisis because there's thousands of people working on it, and what were we going to add? So what we're going to add was what's next. Whatever the next economic system is, in my judgment, it will be too complex for our brains with our vocabulary to understand right now. And as you witnessed last night, the categories of the brain are so calcified they really can't think anymore. So forget all that. What we can do is we can look at what are seeds, agricultural conversation, what are the seeds of the next economic system? And we identified, I don't know, 20, 30 or so of these seeds. And then we had people rate them in terms of how real they were in a variety of ways and discussions and how they could turn out bad and how, like what we talked about, some things turn out bad, some things turn out good. Let's do that ahead of time. So we actually did an assessment of the future elements of the next economy before they even understood concepts. So it's hard to explain that real fast, but I'll give you a couple of thumbnails. But the real answer to your question is, read the study. It's only about 30 pages. It's distilled. And an appendix is a lot longer, but you get this in a CD-ROM. Okay. A couple of things about the next economics, to my judgment, is all of us understand, especially in Europe, that the social contract and the demography of aging population, it doesn't add up. You just can't make it. So let's not go collision. We're starting to hit collisions already. That's what's going on in Greece and all the rest of these. Early collisions are happening now. The old farmer used to work out of his house. We went to a factory because not everybody could have the factory in their house. Well, guess what? We're going to be able to have a factory in our house in the future. Nanotech is moving right on target. Forecasts are right on the mark. They're doing fine. There's all kinds of local stuff that can be done. Also, we should think of ourselves as, to use current economic language, as a holding company. When you work for a job and you go for a job somewhere, they're taking a certain amount of your capacity and paying you for that. Okay. Now, that's not all of you. You may have a lot of different things that are interesting for you, your skills, your interests, your geographic location, your age. There's all kinds of things that you've got that make up you. Imagine charting all those on a piece of paper and then do Google searches on markets for each of those things, and then do little websites for each of those things. Sort of tie all them together in a picture of yourself or some sort of fun sort of thing. And you're actively marketing your capabilities all around the world. I'll give you a simple example. I mentioned the witch doctor before, so I'll stay on the witch doctors. It's fun. I'm not always on an African panel. An African traditional witch doctor may not be able to read and write French, English, or some other language of the international, but they have a nephew that probably can do English or French. They can go to the cyber cafe, and because some of the cyber cafes aren't that expensive, they can spend a couple of dollars and pick up a free website, a free photograph of the witch doctor, and say, witch doctor consultancy, $10. Go to the cyber cafe guy and say, we can't take credit cards, so we'll make you a deal. Whatever money comes in, you take half and give us the rest. Now, the bus to come in, a few dollars, the others, so you're looking at around $5 investment, maybe $6 or $7 investment, right? You come back next week. How many hits do you think that $10 witchcraft consultancy might get? Let's say conservatively 100. Well, 100 times 10 is 1,000. If you go to a venture capitalist, hardest core capitalist pig you can find, and you say, I can do a return on investment of $5 or $10, returns $1,000 in 1 week, and my infrastructure is my face talking, they're going to say, that's a pretty good business deal. So I figure if a non-English speaking, non-French English speaking traditional African doctor can make a living in the cyber age, so can 7 billion people. Now we got 30% of us already connected, which means that 30% of us are connected to 30% of us. That's a lot. The information revolution, people miss the definition. The original definition of revolution, information revolution, in the past you went to the market, you went to the job, you went to the store, you go there, you leave where you are. So the market's here and you revolve around it. The revolution, like Copernicus, was you change the orbit for the midpoint. So now, what this time means that every one of us are the center point. It's not a zero-sum game. We're all the center of 2 billion people. I assume all of you have internet access here, right? What if that 2 billion people would pay you to do what you want to do? It's a very small percent you made to do quite well. So that's another seed. So one I mentioned the other night was non-ownership. Non-ownership is a driving force of innovation in the world right now. And you'll notice when I made the comment to the Microsoft guy last night, I said, you opened up your code not because you wanted to, but because the world became too complex. With a bunch of years of futures research I've done, I'll share you one rule of thumb. No matter what you look at in the future, it's going to turn out more complex than you believe is possible. So to apply that rule of thumb, look at the future of the economic system, assume it can be more complex than you think is possible, and then double that. So okay, we don't need to try to describe it, because if we try to describe it, then you're going to sell it, then we don't know the problem of, like, you know, you do my economic system or I shoot you. Let's evolve it. So the idea of non-ownership is there. The idea of self-employment is there, because if it's true that there's not enough jobs, and if it's true the social contract can't work, and if it's true the demography is going to go on, and by the way, longevity research, we haven't hit it yet. Most of those changes in demographics people are talking about is because babies aren't dying. When I was a Peace Corps volunteer, a woman had to get pregnant 5 times to have 1 child live to 5 in Malawi. I was in a poor area of Malawi. Now, it's 4 children survive to 5, and people are saying 20% are dying. Okay, hey, it used to be 80%. So we haven't really hit the real longevity wave yet. When we hit that one, all those contracts can't make us. So the idea of saying, who am I, how do I make a living in a global market that revolves around me? Now, that's something that's a paradigm, another paradigm shift. It's a paradigm shift of economics, but that's only a second seed. There's about 30 of them. And each one takes a little bit to explain, and otherwise I end up at a lecture here. So you can see it on the website. Yeah.
Well, we're in the last few minutes of the panel, so I want to come up back to what I hope heard from you, and please correct me if I'm missing something. It is such a multi-dimensional problem that food security, close to water security, close to air security, about 3 things that we really cannot live without. The breathing, the drinking, and eating is about 3 things we really cannot live without if we talk about security, period. Add to that now the new dimensions that are very connected. So food is connected to water and clearly to air. Next to that, it's connected to economic security. Do we even have resources to transport the food from those deeply concentrated areas that we heard about, the few countries that produce all of rice, few countries that produce all of corn? Do we have the resources to transport them? And if we do have the resources and infrastructure, can our climate afford it? So with all that massive transportation, can we deal with climate change associated with emissions due to transportation? But it becomes a big, big onion with a few suggestions that you gave on what could be the dimensions of possible solutions. One is poverty. And can we address the issue of poverty and development so that we are immune to price volatility, immune to many other issues related to food? Investment. Can we make sure that the decline in the foreign aid, but also decline in government subsidies and investment in agriculture is resolved, and connected to that engagement of private sector? Can we make sure that the business has enough incentives to be part of the game, whether it's multinationals or national type of corporations? Technology. much has been said on can we make sure that our efficiency of production is increased, including those super new technologies where we can have now a steak without a cow. Legislation and policy making. Can we assure that the policy at the national level is aligned to the regional level, but also aligned to the global level, so that we can find a way to moderate the situation, because very often we're facing the fact that our global food security is at stake, not just, it's an issue somewhere far, far away where we are not close to. Trade and issues of open trade versus protectionism. Can we make sure that we have mechanisms where bans and protectionism in the short run that feel so safe don't damage the international level, where we have seen no evidence that bans or protectionisms of any kind ever bring higher level of food security? And it's all wrapped up in the issue that we probably most radically need to address, is the issue of mindset, paradigm shift, and close to that, extremely central issue of leadership. What is the political leadership, or any other type of business leadership? What is the leadership, and who is the one who is ready to follow the steps of individuals like President Lula and said, this is the top priority, we will treat it as the same level of seriousness as we're treating many, many other crises that we're facing in the world. With that, I would like to conclude the panel. You're welcome to come up to the panelists afterwards. I know some of you have to leave immediately. I appreciate very much the time you took, and I hope also the audience got some new ideas and points out of it. Thank you very much.